Let us pray together. Be with us this morning, God. Quiet our hearts. May our spirits be still, that we might hear from you. Amen. As we pick up in today's Genesis narrative, we find Abraham experiencing a vision from God. At this point in the story, Abraham has long since left his homeland to, on faith, follow God's lead toward a mysterious, undisclosed location. And here in this passage, God promises Abraham that not only will he indeed arrive at this location, but that childless though he may now be, his descendants will one day be more numerous than the stars. It's an exciting promise. But at this juncture of the story, God has already made him this promise twice. And as yet, there has been no evidence that it will ever actually come to pass. So while, yes, this promise sounds great, here's the reality. Abraham and his wife Sarah are getting old. And by this point, there is little reason to trust that they will one day have children of their own, let alone descendants more numerous than the stars. And thus they're anxious and scared. It isn't that they disbelieve, and we don't get all the things we want. And we wrestle time and again with big questions that seem to have no ready answers. And thus we find ourselves like Abraham, having faith, but quietly wondering whether that faith is actually grounded in anything real at all. Herman Melville opens his classic novel, Moby Dick, with Ishmael, the narrator, explaining why he goes to sea. He claims it's in response to the very experience we're talking about this morning. If you'll recall the opening to that book, Ishmael looks out over the port, notes all the people who've come to the ocean to gaze at the water, and he remarks that people long for the ocean because of what the open water represents. Quote, the ungraspable phantom of life. Great phrase. By which he means the uncertainty, the mystery, the nagging question underneath it all that whispers, is it really about anything? As human beings, we spend our lives wrestling with that question. Does what we do with our lives, does who we are, really actually matter? And no matter where we come down on that question, whether we answer yes it does or whether we answer no it does not, we all long for the answer to be yes. We all long for life to have meaning. We all long for life to have purpose. That is why Melville titles this first chapter of Moby Dick, Longings. This is why he has his character go out to sea. Because for Melville, open water symbolizes the universal human longing for meaning amid the mystery. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most insightful critics of religion, said that human beings are inveterate meaning makers. Though he denied that such a thing as meaning existed, still he noted that something in us is magnetically drawn toward the idea of meaning. We simply want meaning to exist. To use Melville's language, we long for meaning to exist. And I want you to think about that, because it's not insignificant. Because if it is true, and I believe it is, if we do all long for meaning, then it begs this question: why? Why, of all species, do human beings alone long for meaning? Dogs don't seek meaning. Cats don't ask questions about the purpose of life. Orangutans don't read philosophy or practice religion. Sadness, fear, anger, pain, irritation, all of these emotions are as common to animals as they are to us. But anxiety, despair, Concern about the future? Hope? Longing? Need for meaning? Only us. French-Algerian writer and philosopher Albert Camus famously said that man is the only creature who refuses to be who he is, by which he meant that only we refuse to acknowledge the meaninglessness of life and our status as mere animals. Great. But then that begs the question again. Why? If so, why do we alone of all creatures believe ourselves to be more than mere animals? Why do we alone long for our lives to have meaning? According to the Christian story, here's why. Because we alone have capacities like rationality and creativity and free will and self-consciousness. Capacities that, as we discussed last week, mark us as being created in the image of God. And thus, we alone can use our imaginations to project ourselves into the future, meaning only we can ask questions about what might happen, and only we can create countless scenarios of what might come to pass. Because only we can conceive of the notion of the future. And because we can conceive of the notion of the future, we also recognize all the attendant possibilities that might come with it. Some of those possibilities good, some of those possibilities bad, very few of those possibilities over which we have any real control. Which brings us back to Abraham. Aging and childless and afraid, Abraham has promised that one day he will have children of his own, progeny so full that it will stretch out and fill the earth like stars in the sky. That's what he wants. But when he projects himself into the future, which is to say, when he imagines his future and all its possibilities, those capacities of logic and reason suggest to him it won't come to pass. And so anxious and afraid and hyper-aware of how little control he has over bringing it to pass, he lies down to go to sleep. And as he does, the text says, a deep and terrifying darkness comes over him. And here's the amazing thing about this story. That deep and terrifying darkness is not fear and anxiety. That deep and terrifying darkness is God. Read the text closely. Follow the language. You'll see that this phrase does not describe Abraham's emotional state. Instead, you'll find that it's a noun phrase pointing back to an antecedent, God. In this story, God is the deep and terrifying darkness that comes over Abraham. And here's our takeaway this morning. God is likewise the deep and terrifying darkness that sometimes comes over us. Not the fear and anxiety and uncertainty, but the quiet voice underneath it all whispering that we were made for something more than this. Not the persistent questioning about life's meaning, but the source of our longing for meaning in the first place. Not the difficult present experience that we can readily describe, but the mysterious presence amid it that we know we can't. And thus that deep and terrifying darkness, that experience that we all sometimes have by virtue of being human, this is not proof of God's absence. Paradoxically, it's proof of God's presence. This is not proof that we're all alone. It turns out to be proof that we're never alone. It's not proof that our faith is futile. It's proof that our faith is, in fact, grounded in something real. See, Abraham did not become the father of faith simply because he held out hope that the future he wanted to come to pass would come to pass. No, Abraham became the father of faith because far more importantly than that, he held out trust that his faith and his future were ultimately in God's hands. And we can't overstress this distinction. There is a world of difference in having faith in faith and having faith in a God who is really there. The first kind hopes to find meaning in a world that might turn out to be meaningless. The other kind trusts that though meaning may be shrouded in mystery, meaning does in fact exist. And thus what comes to pass may or may not prove to be what we wanted or expected. But somehow throughout it all, we will still somehow be well. The popular contemporary Christian group Hillsong gets at this idea in a lovely song called Oceans. They sing, "You call me out upon the water, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery. In oceans deep, my faith will stand." That kind of faith, that kind of trust, is what this Lenten season is all about. It's about our being called, like this song, like Herman Melville's Ishmael, out into the mystery, out upon the water. It's about our being called to trust that, like Abraham, our faith is grounded in something real. And it's about our being called to trust that even if what comes to pass turns out to be other than what we wanted or expected, still, throughout it all, somehow, we will be well. Because Lent is about our trusting that we're not ultimately in control, but God is. It's about our trusting that our faith is not just a vague idea, but that our faith is grounded in a God who is really there. A God who is there in the laughter, peace, and joy. A God who is there in the deep and terrifying darkness. A God who is there in the confusion and the mystery. A God who is there in the ungraspable phantom of life.